Hi everyone. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, known as the Nation's Report Card, administered in 2024, showed that math scores for graduating high school students have dropped since 2019. This and other negative trends in learning has sparked renewed interest in finding evidence-based practices that promote positive gains in learning, particularly in the field of math. A recent meta-analysis of 57 studies published in the early 2025 timeframe showed that executive function training had a small but meaningful effect on students' learning. Cognitive training in executive function had both immediate positive effects within specific subject areas as well as extended transfer gains across other areas. So the question is this a type of strategy that could be effective for helping to improve students' achievement? In short, executive function training is effective and has a positive impact on learning. We'll be discussing this topic in depth during today's Teaching Matters podcast.
Welcome to Teaching Matters, a podcast exploring all things teaching and learning. Teaching Matters is produced by NPR affiliate WOUB Public Media in Athens, Ohio. And here is your host, Dr. Scott Titsworth, Dean of the Scripps College of Communication at Ohio University.
Thank you, Trinity. Today we have two guests joining us. Aubrey Francisco and Michelle Tu are co-executive directors of EF+Math, which is a program within the Advanced Education Research and Development Fund, or AERDF for short. AERDF is a national nonprofit dedicated to unlocking scientific breakthroughs to solve teaching and learning challenges in pre-K to 12 settings. Listeners might be familiar with AERDF and EF+Math from a previous episode exploring this program, which was released in December of 2024, so it'll be nice to have an update. Michelle and Aubrey, thank you both for being on the podcast. It's great to meet both of you today.
Thanks so much for having us on, Scott. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Actually, Aubrey, my first question is to you. We've had AERDF highlighted in various programs in AERDF on the podcast over the previous 2 years, but listeners may not be as familiar with what that overall umbrella program is and what the fund tries to accomplish with the sub-programs such as EF+Math that are part of AERDF. In a broad sense, can you kind of talk about what AERDF is and then how EF+Math fits into that?
Sure, happy to. AERDF is, as you said, a national nonprofit that really is trying to address the need for more emphasis on research and development and innovation in education. As a country, we don't spend very much on education R&D, and we really need to think about how we can do discovery and invention in ways that solve real problems for real teachers and students in real classrooms. And how do we connect kind of the areas of research and product development and education and practice in the classroom in ways that allow us to develop solutions that can really improve outcomes for our learners. And so that's where AERDF started, and EF+Math is actually the first program of the Advanced Education Research and Development Fund, and was launched in 2019 to focus really on challenges.
Aubrey, I'm going to stick with you for one more question. At the beginning of the episode, I talked about statistics related to math scores that came out of the nation's report card. And as I said, those math scores are showing decreases in math skills among students. I'm sure that you all, because of your program, have thought a lot about some of the multiple factors that goes into those declining scores. Do you have thoughts on maybe some of the things that are causing that and, what's propagating this problem that are really within our nation's schools?
Certainly. I mean, I think there are so many challenges that our educators and our math educators are facing in our classrooms. I think within the area of mathematics education, one thing that we have been really focused on is kind of deep conceptual understanding and problem-solving skills and supporting students in deep understanding of fewer but really important math concepts. And I think we see that happening in the field and, the California mathematics framework as well. But it's not something that, while we've called for it, but we've not necessarily supported our educators in helping to provide students with opportunities to actually develop those deep conceptual understanding skills. And so that's really what we see, when we look at NAEP results, what kind of separates the children who are proficient from those who are not proficient tends to be those areas of kind of conceptual understanding, multi-step problem solving. And so we know those areas really rely heavily on executive function skills, and that's part of the impetus for this program, was to really focus in on those areas and go deep in conceptual understanding and supporting students in those areas to see how that propagates across their math learning experience.
Very good. Michelle, turning to you, of course, executive function skills is sort of a hypothesis that underlies really all of AERDF, but certainly the EF+Math program. Can you, in sort of layman's terms for listeners and viewers that have not looked at previous episodes about AERDF, sort of define what executive function skills are and why they're so important as a general basis for students being able to learn?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So executive function skills are really the skills that we believe and we know that all students have and possess. They're assets that they bring to the classroom. And they're skills that help students to manage their attention, their thoughts, their emotions, and behavior. Here at EF+Math, we specifically focus on inhibitory control, working memory, and cognitive flexibility, and can get into what those skills mean. But they are deeply related, as Aubrey was saying, to thinking about how students exercise and show up in math classes, how they think about conceptual understanding, how they approach problem solving. Our program was founded on a large body of research that shows a strong correlation between students' executive function skills and their math outcomes. And specifically, when you look at that, the data and those correlations, and you disaggregate the data between students from low income to higher income backgrounds, it really shows that for students from lower income backgrounds, those with stronger executive function skills tend to also have stronger math outcomes. So this could be a way to kind of lessen that achievement gap that we have been seeing between students. And so that's really what our program has been based off of, is doing further research and really identifying how we can strengthen and support students' executive function skills specifically within the context of math learning, and really thinking about it in that context-specific way as well.
When you're talking about executive function skills, so boiling down, let's just focus on short-term memory, and either of you can answer this. I'm just sort of throwing this out there. If we're focusing on short-term memory, and we know that a lot of evidence suggests that people remember 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information, but how you define what a bit of information is obviously changes as people develop higher order thinking skills. If we put this in the context of a math classroom, if a student's learning 2 plus 2 equals 4 and equations like that, that doesn't seem all that taxing to short-term memory. So what is it about executive function skills that could become a barrier for a student as they learn not only basic math skills, but as you suggested, Michelle, higher order problem solving related to math problems? Mm-hmm. In other words, that was a long way of saying, what are some of the challenges that students might face just looking at short-term memory and executive functioning as they're trying to progress in their math knowledge? Mm-hmm.
I think, if I could broaden it a little bit, I think one of the things that we think about is, executive functions. One of the misconceptions is that, the short-term memory applies to just holding that information in the students' minds. But when you think about applying that to, say, some complex problem solving and word problems and things like that, you can really apply working memory or cognitive flexibility, inhibitory control to all of those different things. And so I think really what we're trying to do is help students not just think, oh, it's just, holding this equation in my mind, but really understanding where in a word problem or, again, more complex math, you're exercising all of those different skills and providing opportunities for students to be really aware of those skills and to strengthen and support those skills within that context of math learning. I don't know if that gets the question, or Aubrey, if you want to add more to that.
I think what you said, Michelle, about you think about multi-step problem solving, you think about a word problem, for example. If a student is going through that problem, they're having to hold a lot of different numbers, a lot of different ideas in their mind at the same time while they're solving that problem. And often in the ways that executive function interventions have been developed, that student might be sitting in a lab in a research setting doing that problem. And so we're really getting at the nuanced mechanistic relationship between their working memory and how well they solve that problem in that setting. But in a classroom, we have a lot more happening, right? There are other students talking, there is a teacher there. The problem itself, the cultural relevance of the problem might make it harder for some students to hold everything in mind. Maybe they're thinking about the actual words, and the words themselves don't maybe aren't as familiar to some students as they are to others. Maybe English is their second language. And so all of those things tax working memory differently. And so what we're trying to really understand or figure out is, where is it that we want to provide supports, for example, for somebody to hold some of that information in their head, versus where do we want to actually provide students with opportunities to train and actually increase their working memory capacity. But how do we do that in a way that is constantly thinking about the actual working memory demands that are happening for that student, which come both from the problem itself and how it's designed, but also the context that they're in. And that's a much more complex problem than trying to design an intervention for that research lab. We're really trying to do that inside a real classroom in this program.
Yeah, I mean, the in vivo variables that would be in an actual classroom are unpredictable and constantly changing. That makes a ton of sense. Kind of sticking with, nailing down some aspects of executive functioning. So, one of the scenarios that I think of when I think of a student that might be struggling in math is that they're sitting at home or they're sitting in a classroom and they're trying to work through a problem. Maybe it's a word problem, maybe it's a more advanced formula that they're trying to solve for, and they just hit a block and they shut down mentally because they don't know how to proceed. Is that an example that would highlight executive function opportunities for growth when they sort of shut down like that?
I think so. And if I could talk a little bit about, here at the EF+Math program, we funded and supported the development of a lot of products to help students with their strengthen and support their executive function skills within the context of math. And that's the exact scenario for the QThink product, which is one of our projects here, where a student is working through a word problem and they perhaps get stuck. And what that product is able to do is really help students with their metacognition. So they're thinking about thinking, and that's an application of executive function skills that we've talked about. And the products that we have helped to develop, because we're trying to strengthen their skills within the context of math, we're able to kind of pull in usage data and kind of see what students are doing within the platform and have these detectors that are kind of running in the background and trying to understand, oh, this student is stuck, here's what they've done, here's what they haven't, and they pop up with just-in-time metacognitive supports, asking a student, what strategy have you tried? What strategy have you tried in the past that might be able to, be transferred to this scenario here? What worked about that strategy, and do you think it would work in this scenario? And ask them those types of questions to really help unlock their thinking. And so that's something that we've tried to do within kind of this this ed tech tool that can provide that just-in-time support, but that's also a technique that teachers can also do pencil and paper when they're working with students. But I definitely think, when a student is stuck in that moment, being able to help them think about their process, think about how they plan and continue to move forward, think about the strategies they may use to kind of unstick from that part of that problem, are all ways that they could exercise their executive function skills within that moment.
Yeah, very good. Aubrey, kind of turning to what Michelle was just talking about. So you all are supporting the development of evidence-based solutions through your program. So you're helping people carry out the R&D, and I don't want to speak for you, this is your program, but I understand conceptually you're there as a support mechanism to develop these effective practices and then to propagate them. When we look specifically at how that might play out in a classroom, based upon the programs that you have worked with so far, what would a lesson look like where a teacher has been able to figure out ways to integrate executive function interventions into their teaching of math? In other words, you've got a before and after, or you've got a pre-program, post implementation. How does it differ? In other words, what is the teacher doing differently once they get exposed to some of the products that you've helped entities create?
Sure. I might speak briefly at a high level and then have Michelle give a couple of specific examples. I think what looks like differently, some of what Michelle was just speaking to, is the idea of like scaffolding or prompting a student to use their metacognitive skills. What is this problem trying to ask? Where are you stuck? Prompting students to kind of bring those skills in. And that might be kind of a scaffold to help them use the skills they already have. It also might look like training in terms of an app or a program that actually, you can think about like the brain training games that some folks might be familiar with. might look like that, but actually integrated into the mathematics itself. So say a student is going through a number of fact fluency problems, it could look like that. And it also can just look like engagement of those skills. But I'll pass it to Michelle to share a few examples of what our teams have developed.
Yeah. I think those are great examples that Aubrey has shared. There's some direct training examples with the fact fluency, and there's some that I mentioned with QThink of kind of having these supports, these just-in-time supports integrated. I think there's a little bit more in terms of kind of the broader research that we've done of what's different before and after with teachers. I think one is just really awareness of, like, we found a lot of teachers are kind of familiar with executive function skills. They have a little bit of misconceptions about what those skills may be. And so I think before and after our program, it's like, one, teachers know what these skills are, and they have a really clear definition of what they are. I think two, there's what Aubrey mentioned, the metacognitive processes, prompting and being able to scaffold students in the moment. There's a lot around collaboration and discourse. You exercise so many of your executive function skills when you're talking with your peers, thinking about your strategies. And so I think teachers before and after our program are more able to support that type of collaboration discourse in the classroom. And then this may take us to a different topic, but I think another thing that's really important to our program is really this focus on students' beliefs in themselves as mathematicians and math learners and how that intersects with executive function skills. And so another before and after with teachers who have used our products is that they really know how to foster a sense of belonging in the classroom community, and help students to kind of affirm their beliefs in themselves as mathematicians and their math identity. And so I think all of those things are, we directly support those within the products, and kind of those things are kind of baked into the products that we've supported so that it's easy for teachers to do this. It's been integrated into a product, but those are also just practices any teacher could take and implement in any classroom to help students with their executive function skills and their math learning.
Yeah, I think this question is actually kind of connected to, what you were just talking about, Michelle. But, just thinking about my own math experience when I was in, primary and then secondary, which was horrible, and didn't get much better going into college, at least until graduate school. But one of the terms that comes to mind is resilience, that when you're trying to learn math and it's hard, and sometimes it is hard, being resilient through that and sort of having, a growing mindset rather than I can or can't do it, that's very binary, is so important. And that's true for a lot of things, not just math. But, in my own experience, I just assumed that I couldn't do math. And so, as you're developing products and starting to work with partners through your program, how do you focus on this idea of resilience? I think you've already kind of touched on it, but I think that's such an important concept when it relates to math, because it is one of those subjects where people assume that they either can or cannot do it. And that resilience, I think, is so important to getting over that hump of I can do it or not.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. And Aubrey, I know you probably have things you want to share here too. I think it's one of those things, I think it's just the core of what we believe here at EF+Math, that EFs are another asset that students have. And I think that helps them to build resilience and understanding. It's like another tool in your toolbox. So, if I'm stuck on a math problem, but I know, like, I could solve this, but my fluency skills, I have a hard time with multiplication. It takes me a little bit to be able to figure out this multiplication. And so that's mentally taxing for me, and therefore I can't solve this word problem. EF skills are another asset that students are bringing to the classroom, right? That they can recognize, I can develop this skill, and it then reinforces my resilience in math. Because if I develop my working memory skills, now I can, do mental math a little bit easier. If I can develop my inhibitory control skills, well, maybe that's what's been holding me back from being able to understand word problems, because I'm being distracted by this extraneous information in the word problems. So I think when we think about resilience, it's part of that, of just like identifying that executive function skills are another asset that you're bringing and can help you, if you know that that's something you can develop and strengthen and use, that can help you kind of overcome when you stumble a little bit in the math classroom. And then I think a lot of it, again, so a lot of our products just make executive function skills, awareness of them. Many of them start with like a unit 0 that helps students to understand, like, I have these skills and these are things I'm bringing to the classroom. And again, all of our products really kind of instill those ideas of the belonging, identity, and just really make them visible. So I can give specific examples of that, but really make it visible to students. So I think it's really just that awareness and bringing kind of to the forefront of students' minds that help them understand this is something I can grow and improve upon, and therefore can become more resilient in math because of that.
Yeah, I might just.
Please go ahead.
Oh, no, I would just build on some of the pieces Michelle mentioned there. I think resilience is connected to a lot of other things, right? Like, do I feel I belong in this classroom? Do I feel that I identify as a math learner or somebody who's good at math? Do I feel anxiety in this classroom? And so a lot of the ways we have been trying to understand the impact of these products is to understand how those things are changing for students as well. And how do you design products? So, having mathematicians who look like the students or who have multiple identities that are related to the students, what impact that has. Or, as Michelle mentioned, discourse and conversation. One of the programs we supported actually allowed students to solve problems together, but they were doing it fully in chat, in typing. And that actually reduced a lot of the anxiety that students might have felt if they were having to speak aloud to each other. And so some students who might not jump in to try to help solve that problem were jumping in the chat to solve that. And so we're thinking about the connection between those different aspects of resilience and all of the aspects of, am I a math learner? Do I feel belonging in this classroom, as well as part of trying to support that resilience?
Yeah, that's really interesting. In my field of communication, we study a concept called communication apprehension, which is exactly what you're talking about, where if it's a verbal discourse of groups of students trying to work through a problem, there's going to be a few students in every group that will feel reticent to speaking up. And it's not because it may not be because they don't understand what to say. They just don't want to talk out loud. And that's really interesting, thinking about how you can sort of neutralize that somewhat by going to a text-based environment. I do want to circle back to more examples, but Aubrey, sticking with you, how many programs are in your portfolio right now? I mean, how many are you sort of, how many groups are you working with?
Right now, we're currently working with 3 teams that have developed mature products and have been evaluating them in much larger settings across large numbers of schools and districts. Over the course of the 5-year program, we worked with 11 different R&D teams, many of them developing math learning programs, as we've talked about, supplemental learning programs or core curricular programs that teachers and students use. Some of them actually developing new ways to assess or understand students' executive function skills and new ways to support those executive function skills. That's something we haven't really talked about much yet, but a lot of times what we understand about students' executive function skills are these sort of assessments that might be done one time completely outside of the math classroom. But what we're talking about here and trying to design into our products are ways to actually understand, as a student is doing math, what are their executive function skills in this moment? And what are the other things that might be influencing those executive function skills? And doing that requires new ways of assessing. And so we have been simultaneously building new ways of understanding and assessing students' EF skills and building products this entire time. And that's part of what EF+Math set out to do, to advance, our overall understanding of how do we move beyond this kind of known correlation between math outcomes and executive function skills to really understand, what are the strategies for intervening that are most likely to improve outcomes for our students.
Yeah, that's great. Michelle, do you want to add anything to that?
I think Aubrey covered a lot there. I'm happy to dig into anything. There's anything more.
Let me go back to you and let you dig in a little bit. Let me go back to a version of this question then. So if I'm a classroom teacher, as I think about, I've got my 25 to 30 students or, however big the class is out there, and we're working through problems. When I think about the fact that I have students who might be having challenges with executive functioning skills, and I look out there, that's an invisible problem, right? I mean, I might see some signs of it, but it's really invisible because I can't see inside their heads. And so based upon some of the experience that you all have had with the programs you're working with, and to that point, Aubrey, that you just made about being able to see it in the moment, what are some signs that teachers might be able to hone in on and say, I know that that's executive functioning, but I have to get more specific to know whether it's inhibition or, there are different aspects of executive functioning that could be challenging for the student. And how do you dig in on that and start to make progress on helping individual students when you can't see what's going on inside their head?
Yeah, I'd love to take that question. I think we're trying to actually get around that of like let's make it visible. Are there ways that we can do this? And so one of the products that we've supported is called Math Fluency Plus. It's out of the Mind Research Institute, and it's a supplemental program. You can use it 10 minutes a day, 10 to 15 minutes a day, but it is direct EF training within the context of math fact fluency. And so students are exercising these skills and trying these skills out, and there's a dashboard that has been displayed to a teacher and to a student in asset-based ways. Again, we really want to think about executive function skills as assets that students are bringing to the classroom, but it shows the growth in each of the different facets of working memory, inhibitory control, cognitive flexibility. And so we are trying to make that visible. Another one of our projects, this is one of our kind of applied research projects, so it's not quite yet ready for in-classroom use, but made a huge contribution to the field, was really thinking about what would it mean. One of the things that we believe is that executive functions can fluctuate, so it's not kind of a fixed IQ number that a student has, but this is something that can fluctuate and change day to day based on context, based on cultural background, a lot of different things. And so our teams created an assessment that could be used daily to be able to understand students' executive function skills. And I think we're not quite there yet, but the ideal world would be, this could be a quick assessment students could take at the beginning of the day. It's game-based, so it doesn't feel like an assessment, but students could take this daily, and there could be information and data passed back to teachers and students to help them see that. So I think we try to, I can answer your other question, but I think we also try to address this a different way of like, let's try to make this visible, and let's try to make this something that students can see their growth, and teachers can see their growth in.
Yeah, absolutely. And you would hope parents as well?
Yes. So many of our products were primarily designed for in-classroom use, and so looking at providing data back to teachers and students, but many of them also could be used in the home environment as well. Yeah. And parents could certainly have access to their students' dashboards and that information. Because your program specifically was the first with AERDF, and you've been around since 2019, you've accumulated a tremendous data set, related to executive function skills and math. Are there highlights from, I know that I'm asking you to do a quick meta-analysis on, probably, hundreds of studies, but you've already said that there's an obvious positive correlation between executive function skills and mathematics achievement. I'm sure that there's a lot of nuance, though, that becomes interesting as you dig into that data. What are some observations that the two of you have, ran across where you've like, okay, this is actionable information that we need to try to cultivate and work into, the projects that our partners are working on? Yeah. Do you want me to take this one, Aubrey? I'm happy to. We can speak about the large data set. So we are yet working on that. We have an integrative data set with data points from about 10,000 students. And I think something that we did that was really different here is that we chose to, we didn't get into this too much, but our program focuses on three facets. So mathematics, executive function skills, and equitable learning experiences for students. And so we measured all of those three things. And so that will be one of the things that comes out of our program is we have this amazing data set that has information about all of those things. And we're in the process right now of analyzing it. So be on the lookout in the next few months for the report that will come from that. And we hope to continue to provide access to researchers to that data set to be able to, analyze it and further dig in because there is so much there. But we have conducted a lot of individual studies. So we've paired with an independent evaluator in the later phases of our program to conduct fairly large scale and very rigorous research studies of the three products that Aubrey mentioned that were advanced. And from those studies, one of the highlights that we have is one of our products called Fraction Ball. And the Fraction Ball team, year over year, there are 3 studies that have been funded by EF+Math, but we have seen positive and significant gains on an assessment of rational number understanding after using the Fraction Ball assessment. And so that's been very exciting because the studies have increased in sample size and increased in rigor, and yet we've seen those gains hold. They also have gains in specifically students' executive functions in context skills related to planning, and so that's been a huge win for our program. Another one of our products, the QThink product that I mentioned, we had a quasi-experimental design study that was conducted, and we saw positive impacts related to a distal state standardized math outcomes compared to a comparison group. And then we have smaller studies. So each of our teams ran smaller pilot studies with sample sizes around several hundred students. And some of the strongest things we've seen is correlations between working memory and math fact fluency. correlations between metacognition and problem-solving abilities. An increase in metacognition skills kind of it shows promise for decreasing math anxiety and increasing math identity and math-related attitudes. And so we're seeing a lot of promise when you kind of look collectively across that research base from the 5 years. There's a lot of promise here and a lot showing that we should continue to be investigating this relationships between EF+Math and continue down this pathway as a potential for really supporting students' math learning.
Yeah, very good. Aubrey?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would just add to that was a nice summary of a lot of data.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things Michelle touched on, but I'll just emphasize, is that we don't have a lot of good data sets that allow us to understand how things like anxiety, for example, relate to executive function skills and the nuanced understanding of how these things play together in influencing math outcomes. And so this data set allows us to do a lot of analyses that are forthcoming because the study's just completed. We are just compiling this data set. Mm-hmm. But a lot of things like what Michelle spoke to around, it seems like maybe improving students' metacognition skills might reduce the impact that their math anxiety has on their performance. That's a great and nuanced finding that we can gain from this kind of data. And so we'll be doing a lot more exploration to try to understand what else we can learn now that we have this really rich data set.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to have a link to the EF+Math program in the text accompanying the podcast. So viewers and listeners that want to learn more about the specific products that you're trying to work with right now, they can find out more information there. But let's assume, I would assume that there's a lot of teachers, especially math teachers, that will be interested in this podcast that will hear about this and go, I want to learn more about this. I want to figure out ways to integrate this into my classroom. And maybe they're not connected to the partners that you all are working with. What's some advice that you would give teachers that buys into this premise that executive function skills is sort of like one of the things that needs to be unlocked in order to help their students have a growth mindset and progress through math learning? How do they start doing that if they're not in some of the programs that you all are supporting? Because some of those are more regional and and really you're helping people create products that will eventually go to market, but maybe they're not there quite yet. And so how would you advise teachers to sort of start going down this path, recognizing the positive effect that it could likely have for their students?
I think there are a couple of things. One, I would say, is really helping students understand that they have these core cognitive capacities. Like, we all have them. We all use them every day. And we use them in service of a goal. So really thinking about how do you help students set a goal and then understand that they have these skills that they can use to achieve that goal and that they can grow and change over time. I think just adding that, I know teachers do that all the time, trying to support students in developing a growth mindset. I think bringing in executive function skills and that this is something your brain really already has and you can use is helpful and might take away from where we tend to, not intentionally, but tend to focus on, students perhaps who have weaker EF skills. We don't tend to focus on the fact that all students have them. So I think that's one thing. The second thing I would think about is looking at the curriculum, the task, the whatever program you're using, and thinking about the executive function demand that it creates. And sometimes a high executive function demand might be important. Engaging those skills is how they get developed, right? Math in itself develops your EF skills. Developing your EF skills improves your ability to do math. It's reciprocal. But I think it's just a way to think about the tasks that you're providing to students and thinking about what do I want them to be focused on. And perhaps if the EF demand is too high, maybe actually you might want to think about a task where it's a little bit lower. So I think that's one thing I would think about. And the last thing I'll highlight is that we have been working alongside Dr. Amani Goffney, a professor at University of Maryland, in math education to develop some PD modules that will be available to all teachers to allow them to start to dig into executive function skills and provide opportunities for them to learn a little bit more about what these skills are and how to support their students in understanding them and engaging them in the math classroom. So alongside the products that we have developed, that'll be available and really taking lessons learned from across all of our products. Because as you can imagine, as a program focused on executive function skills and equity in mathematics, we had to develop a lot of professional learning along the way, alongside these tools. And so those PD modules will take lessons learned from across all of the different products that we supported over the years.
Very good. Michelle, we haven't really talked about, one of the pillars, which is equity, that's part of AERDF and EF+Math. How does that get operationalized in sort of the programs that you're cultivating in your program, specifically in math?
Yeah, it is the third pillar of our program, and our products have been specifically designed for Black and Latino students and students of all races experiencing poverty. And we talk a lot about the intersectionality of, like, for these particular students, it's math, EF, and the equitable learning experiences. I think there's a couple ways that these show up. I think one is that we, when you think about these students, a lot of times you think about, how do they see themselves as mathematicians? Where do they see math in their communities? How do others view them as mathematicians? So that is something that's baked in, as I mentioned before, into all of our products, is really just acknowledging that, creating a sense of belonging and community, creating a classroom community, helping students to understand the knowledge and assets that they bring, helping them to understand that the lived experiences and their cultural experiences might help and shape the way they see mathematics, and honor those as wonderful assets that they're bringing to the classroom. And so I think there's a lot of that, of really being able to see yourself as a mathematician, see others who look like you, see others in your community who are like you that are math learners. And so that's something that kind of cuts across all of the different products that we have developed. I think we also try to think about the intersection of executive functions and equity. And so specifically in the math classroom, one of the things I like to think, an example that I give is, so say there's a student doing a word problem, that already takes executive function, like a ton of executive function skills, and we can break down exactly, what that would look like. But if I'm, say, a multilingual learner, I've got another layer on top of that in terms of, like, I may, the first word that I may, be thinking of is actually in my home language. And now I've got to think and use my cognitive flexibility skills to use my inhibitory control skills to understand, wait a second, this is my home language. I now need to use flexibility skills to translate this into English. And that also is all happening at the same time that they're also processing math. So I think also, as Aubrey was mentioning, an awareness of teachers of, like, the cognitive load that each of your students may be experiencing in the classroom, and providing supports, visibility and supports into all of that for students. And so those are just a couple of examples. And then, Aubrey, if there's more that you would add to that, because it's such a strong pillar and foundation of our program.
I think those are great examples, Michelle. I think it's also about who developed our products and how they got developed, and I know this is something that when you were able to talk with our colleagues, they talked a lot about, but students themselves really being centered in the design has really changed the way that things are designed. Michelle talked about an app that tries to display students' EF skills, right? And you could think about a way that would do that in a really competition-oriented way or comparison-oriented way. But we really have thought deeply about how to display in a growth-oriented way and to support students in understanding these as skills that grow over time. And so it's really also, in addition to kind of, seeing themselves in the curriculum, having that kind of cultural relevance, having opportunities for discourse and relationship development, frankly, between students and between students and teachers. Those are all really important equitable practices in the math classroom, but also on the executive function skill side, thinking about how to do that in a way that is very equitable and growth and asset oriented.
Yeah, very good. You all have done a great job of, sort of overviewing where Math plus EF is at right now. Where do you think it goes over the next 5 years? I mean, what are you excited about? And I know that you can't divulge, secret conversations of programs that might be onboarded, but, what's exciting to you about, what you've done so far since 2019 and, what the future holds? I know you said you're about to, get close to releasing your major report that talks about the data. I'm sure that's exciting for you, but what's your future dreams like as the co-executive directors of this program?
Sure, I'm happy to kick off. EF+Math is a time-limited program, and intentionally so, matching the urgency of the challenge here, and the idea being that we're kind of filling a gap that doesn't always exist in the space, that there's resources available to develop programs in a way that are really teacher and student centered and really strongly evidence-based and grounded in what we understand about how kids learn. And we wish all education products would be developed that way, but the reality is there are market forces that push for a different kind of focus and prioritization. But this program has allowed for this development of programs with that focus on evidence and learning science and educator and student voice. And so what's coming out of it then as a result, and what we're excited about is, of course, the products themselves that are, getting out there and going to market and starting to reach more and more learners. We talked about the data set and what we can learn from that data set and from this collection of studies that we'll be making widely available, which for researchers can really help us keep moving further towards understanding, like, how do we really design EF interventions integrated into math learning in ways that are more effective than what we might see with mixed results around some of the training studies. Some of them have been very effective, as you've said, and others might not transfer as well. And so how can we kind of advance the way we design these, make them more usable in real classrooms, and really integrate them deeply into mathematics learning? So we're excited to see how researchers take up that data and all of that research and take that into the classroom. And of course, on the educator side, I think what we've seen with the educators we've worked with is that thinking deeply in this asset-based way about kids' executive function skills has really shifted how they think about their students and what their students are capable of and how they provide students with the agency and the opportunities to leverage those skills. And so seeing all of the educators, we worked with 700 people who have been involved in this program over the 5 years, and how they're bringing that forward into their work. Those are the folks who have helped develop the programs themselves. Thousands have students have been reached, of course. So excited to see that there is this community that has been built that came together around this idea that all students are brilliant and capable of success in mathematics. And now we have to shift how we design for those students and make sure we're holding ourselves accountable as the educators and the developers to designing in a way that supports them and bringing these skills into the classroom. So I'm excited to see how all of that continues in the different sectors that were brought together over these 5 years.
Very good. Michelle, do you want to add anything?
Sure. I love everything that Aubrey mentioned. And I'll talk a little bit about the process here. And I know you got to dig into this a bunch with our colleagues when you spoke with them earlier. But the way, it's not just the products that came out of EF+Math, but the way that we created these products and who we created them with, as Aubrey mentioned. So we didn't get to touch on it too much, but EF+Math was really built on this foundation of something called inclusive R&D. And I really do believe, I was a researcher for 12 years before coming to EF+Math, and it's so different the way that we develop the products here, where we had researchers, developers, and educators working together literally at every step of the process, and it was so intentional. There was time and space created for it. We're all aligned with the same values. There were frameworks. There was just so much thought put into how we did this. And so that is all of those learnings are getting packaged into what we're calling our inclusive R&D toolkit, which will be featured on our website. And I think that's just as important as the products that came out of this is this process. And now, as Aubrey mentioned, we have this community of 700 people who are involved with this. And the folks who came out of the EF+Math program really tell us, like, I am forever changed because of this. I will do things differently. And so it's amazing to think there's this community of champions that will kind of spread the word, not only about math, not only about EFs and equity, but inclusive R&D out into the world. So I'm super excited for that. And all of that will be available on our Learning Hub and our website for folks to be able to access and learn from as well.
That's very good. Is there anything that I have not asked you about that you're potentially excited to talk about today before we say goodbye?
I can't think of anything, Michelle. Yes.
Yeah. I would do, if it's okay, I would do one pitch for our, as Aubrey mentioned, we're an intentionally time-limited program, and so EF+Math will be sunsetting, and so there's been amazing work these 5 years, products, research findings, assessments and tools, the inclusive R&D toolkit, the educator PD modules, and we want those findings and those learnings to live on in the field and continue to have impact. So I would just encourage folks to check out our website when it launches later this winter, and to be able to find and use all of those amazing resources. There are particular products you can use, but there's a lot of things that can just be taken up by researchers, developers, educators, and used in their own practice moving forward.
And Michelle, just so that I'm clear, is that website that will launch later, will that be at the same location in the web world that the current EF+Math web page is at under AERDF, or will it be a separate one?
It'll be a separate site,
Okay.
efmathprogram.org, but if you go to AERDF and click on the EF+Math program, it will redirect you to that site.
Well, I tell you what, once the website launches, maybe if either or both of you would like to come back on and just sort of overview what's on the website so that viewers and listeners, can have an idea of what's there, I think that would be useful, and we would love to have you back on. One of the things that's always impressed me about this program and then the broader AERDF program specifically is the fact that you sort of bridge the gap between the researchers and then the practitioners really well. And, that's something that you don't necessarily see in other parts of the education economy, right? And so I'm always happy to help, get the word about your programs out, because you're really trying to do a good job of having evidence-based effective practices, but then also getting them to the teachers that actually need to be able to use them. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and it's been great meeting the two of you.
Really appreciate it, Scott. It's been great chatting with you about this.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, and as I mentioned, we'll have the link to the EF+Math website in the text that accompanies the podcast. I want to thank everyone for listening. We have an exciting spring of podcasts that's on slate, and if you have ideas, thoughts, or comments you'd like to reach out to us about, simply send us an email at teachingmatterspodcast@ohio.edu. That's all one word, teachingmatterspodcast@ohio.edu, and we'd be happy to interact with you that way. Thanks so much to our associate producers, April Koska and Trinity Sweet, for helping behind the scenes to make this possible. And thank you for listening, and we hope everyone has a great day.